Blog Talk Radio.
You're tuned into In5D Radio, the next dimension in radio, where we bring you the hottest, in-depth, spiritual, metaphysical, esoteric conversations and news. Get ready for spirit, body, and mind to expand in 3, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1.
Greetings, and welcome to Quantum Healing with Candace. Excuse me, I'm your host, Candace Craw-Goldman. This program was created to assist humans in this rapidly changing world, and its foundation is based upon the late, great Dolores Cannon's work and humanity's new understanding and acceptance of the quantum world and the role that consciousness plays in shaping both our individual and collective realities. I'm a full-time practitioner of Dolores's method and have had the honor and privilege of working with and alongside of her for several years. I'd like to take this moment to thank In5D for its support of this show and also Quantum Healing and Dolores and all of those out there who continue her work and her discoveries in healing. Today is October 2nd, 2015. And actually, this is going to be a really important show, I think. We're calling it the 411 on QHHT. And I'm bringing on a wonderful friend and colleague today named MJ Olinger to help me talk about all things QHHT, which is called Quantum Healing Hypnosis in the long form. So a little bit about MJ. MJ was born with an inner sense of knowing, navigating the world with her intuitive perspective and staying open to unlimited possibilities. She's been a long-time nurse. She's a family woman, an artistic quilter, and a grandmother. And an important story about MJ is in December 2011, her 40-year-old son, Jason, left the planet by suicide, and her world was turned upside down and right side out as she experienced the deep, dark pit of grief and loss. And some of that brought her, I know, to QHHT. She has certifications in several modalities and maintains her RN licensure. But her focus is exclusively QHHT. She's a certified advanced level 2 practitioner and an active participant of the forum community for dedicated practitioners all over the world. And besides facilitating QHHT sessions, MJ is a really important part of our community because she's working on an amazing project of indexing all of Dolores's books by subject matter. She's an archivist and a scholar, then, of Dolores Cannon's work, and these indexes provide a reference to assist practitioners in their educational learning as we all move on. And I want to welcome MJ to the program. And let's see, I need to press the button. There you are. Hi, MJ.
Hi, Candace. Thank you for the invitation this evening.
Oh, you're so very welcome. I'm so very, very happy to have you. So for our listeners out there, I'd like to tell you a little bit how we're going to play the show tonight. We're going to give a brief history of QHHT and Dolores and how she got into this. And then we're going to talk about who and why people come for sessions, their typical questions, and an overview of a typical QHHT session. And then we're going to take questions and comments from listeners or those of you out there who'd like to know more. So why don't we just start like Dolores Cannon says, at the beginning is always a good place to start, wouldn't you say, MJ? How did Dolores get into this work so long ago?
Well, I think, in all honesty, Dolores, we could spend the next 2 hours just on her life, her experience, who she is. She's a pioneer, investigator, reporter, finder of lost knowledge, world traveler. She has so many accolades. Just talking about Dolores in and of itself is a beautiful journey through life. However, to go very briefly with Dolores, it was a good, 50 years, Candace?
Yeah, I think it's just been about 50 years.
Yeah. And she started out as a quote-unquote traditional hypnotherapist with her husband. And from there, that's how she got into these clients that were starting to go to past lives. And people really want to get into her history in detail. The book that she wrote on 5 Lives Remembered really talks about the initiation of her journey into this work. And fast forward over these years, she tweaked it to the point where it is an easy approach to learn if anyone is seeking to learn this technique as a practitioner. And it is also a technique that our clients embrace, because they're not required to do really anything other than just to talk about themselves and relax and allow the flow to happen. And that's the beauty of her technique. Amazing results. So in that, her approach is really a non-traditional. So if someone says, well, what is QHHT? I like to start out and say it's a non-traditional hypnotherapy approach. In other words, as Dolores would say, we don't swing the watch in front of our clients and we don't make them talk like a chicken. That's Dolores talks about that stage hypnosis for fun and show and stuff like that. It's nothing that. It's at the other end of the spectrum. So what I tell people is, if you're looking for some mind-bending information and going to your core, your inner soul, your higher self, the God source, whatever you deem that name that you're familiar with, we come in contact and we work with this higher consciousness. And so the beauty of it is the client is the one that not only embraces this and gains, it is also, it's like we open the door to that client's journey, helping them discover information they may not have been able to get to. And then after the session is over, I know I'm kind of fast forward here, but after the session is over, that continuum of healing and connection remains for the rest of their life. Whereas I think I'm comfortable in saying traditional hypnotherapy sometimes is a shorter acting, a quick fix, maybe to stop smoking or weight, those things that we're familiar with. And that all has a purpose. If you're looking for a deep connection and amazing results, then quantum healing is for you. Do you have something to add? I tried to be...
That's really great. No, you did a fabulous job. I think the one very important difference between QHHT and traditional hypnosis and hypnotherapy, an important distinction is the fact that in hypnotherapy and in traditional hypnosis, in general, the setup was that the facilitator would offer suggestions to the client while they're in a suggestible state. And in QHHT, nothing of the kind happens. It's completely client-focused and client-driven. The facilitator of a QHHT session doesn't and would never think to offer up any suggestions for change, based upon their own thoughts and understanding and reality. All of this comes from the client. I think it's a big difference between the two modalities in general.
I totally want to underscore that for the listeners, because that is a key component, and that's one of the questions I think as practitioners we get asked, do you lead this? Do you lead us somewhere? And we don't lead. So excellent point.
So MJ, why would anyone come to have a session, or what kind of people come for sessions? What's the typical client, or maybe even the not typical client? Tell us what kind of people come for QHHT sessions. Why?
Oh, that's a broad question, and the answer would be, I don't believe the practitioners have identified a stereotype. In other words, when someone calls a practitioner to have a session, we have no idea what that person's life is, what they're looking for. The commonality would be in their questions as far as they want to know about their life purpose, what are they supposed to be doing. Those, are a common question or a common theme that we see. But the kind of person is really so individual, and that's the beauty of QHHT. It is not tailored to any specific personality. It is just, we work with the client wherever the client is. Maybe they've just begun their journey, connecting and discovering their gifts and even becoming aware of Dolores. And then we have other clients that, have been in the spirituality years and years, and that's how they live their lives, and they're in tune and they meditate and in diet, mind, body, spirit, everything. So it's, I can say there's no stereotype, but the people come because they're seeking answers, and they really want to know what's happening.
That's a great way of putting it right there. Just answers for something, right? Just either answers about a particular problem, a whole set of problems. Maybe they have a physical problem. Maybe they have a mystery on their hands. But it's people who are looking for answers. I think that's a really, I'm sorry I jumped in on you, but I got very excited. I think that's just, that's it. It's such a jewel. QHHT is going to give you some answers no matter what your questions are.
Exactly. And again, we talked about the practitioner not leading. Well, the practitioner doesn't even know the outcome of the session. In other words, a client comes in with a list of questions, and we'll talk about that later, but they're seeking information, and that the information that comes through during the trance session, the trance portion of the session, we can't predict what information's coming through because we're working with that higher power. So,
and there's just such different.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I was just going to say, and there's just so many different questions and so many different outcomes to sessions as well. It's kind of like the box of don't know how it's going to play out.
Yes. Now, we might want to clarify a couple of things, and that is through Dolores' guidelines to her practitioners, We prefer people that are 18 years or older.
Mm-hmm.
And so, in other words, we don't have sessions with children or teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is some other profiles, such as, if someone is diagnosed with schizophrenia or a very severe mental problem where they're not perhaps connecting the dots on a daily basis, they struggle with continuum of thinking, things like that. At this time, Dolores has asked us, those are not the people that will have the best outcome. So, and sometimes we don't know that until we talk to them. Yeah.
Right. And if I may interject there, though, even children and even people who have these, challenges in their life that Dolores says they don't make the best clients, even they can benefit from a surrogate session of QHHT. That kind of gets into the advanced QHHT world when we talk about Dolores and her method. But I've had many clients come to see me concerned about people who can't have a QHHT session themselves, loved ones who may be either too young, or they might be in a coma, or they may be too severely injured or something, or maybe have schizophrenia, etc. And we are actually able to very often find out information about loved ones by going and exploring the consciousness of a surrogate, and that can be extremely valuable and bring a lot of peace to the family and sometimes some incredible healing as well. So even when that's the issue and that person may not be a candidate for the session themselves, QHHT can still often provide answers even for those people.
Excellent point. I'll give an example of a surrogate session that I held. The client didn't come in with she wasn't inquiring about a surrogate healing for her son and daughter. It was something that we discussed in the interview when she came in and we were talking, and what was happening is during the interview where the client tells about their life and their concerns and questions and health, those types of things. She had mentioned that she had some specific concerns regarding her daughter and her son. And that's when I mentioned to her about the surrogate healing and how it works. And so briefly, how that does work is once we get permission to move forward with that. So in other words, I said to the client, all you have to do is verbalize and through your heart, that you would like to offer surrogate healing to your son and daughter. Well, the son and daughter were over 21, so they're an adult. But that's okay. So she said, yes, let's go ahead and try that, she said. So when she was in trance and the timing was appropriate, I asked the client's higher self, and that's the power that we work with, to connect with the daughter's higher self and ask, is it okay if we connect and we have some questions? Well, the response that came back was the daughter's higher self responded positively, yes. So then we went on to do questions and receive information. Then when her son was next on the list, we went through the same process of honoring and asking permission, because again, we don't lead and we don't cross boundaries of people's life of anywhere. So we got to the sun, and unfortunately, we got a no. And so, but it was done in a graceful way. No one was offended. But the answer that came back was, no, he is not ready to receive information. So with due respect, that's kind of the flip side of getting permission from the higher self, and also getting a stop, no, the person's not ready.
That must have been a very interesting session for you, and a great validation of the method itself, where one person says yes and the other one declines.
Yes, it was. But it was done in a beautiful way. I mean, the client wasn't upset that we couldn't connect, and, I mean, I know from my own practice, I never get upset. I trust that higher power, because the higher power is what is truly providing information and facilitating what is best for the client.
Yes, so, and actually I think that kind of leads us right into another thing to talk about, higher power. How does religion or spiritual beliefs fit in to the practice of QHHT? A lot of people wonder about that, and if people who don't believe in God can have sessions, and if people believe in different kinds of things, how does that work?
Well, I think religion is a term that is defined in the dictionary, and that is on religious, quote-unquote, beliefs. And religion and their religious preference is not associated with what happens in QHHT. What is associated is their belief. What is in their heart? What do they believe is the higher power? It can have any name they want to, label it with a label, but I know we have practitioners around the world, and it's very interesting to hear about their sessions because of different cultural beliefs, that is couched in their religion because of, let's take Buddha, and we could go through every religion and look at, who do they look for as their kind of leader, so to speak. But it doesn't take a religion of any sort, but it does take a belief in oneself and a belief that comes from the heart.
And how about atheists? Can an atheist have a QHHT session?
Well, I wouldn't. That's a question I don't ask people. Are you atheist or not? To be honest, I have not had someone request a session that says I don't believe in anything after I'm gone. I just leave that door open. They may say they're an atheist, and that's what they've been believing, but it's interesting to know that if they would call, they're inquiring. So, Dolores has taught us that, the person, the client, higher self, guides them to have a QHHT session, even before they pick up the phone and contact a practitioner. There's no coincidence.
Absolutely. And, I love the fact we talk about this in our forum community, which is, an international online community of practitioners practicing in the most far-flung places that, you can imagine, all over the planet. And what we talk about is this idea, this trend, this thing that we know that has been happening, and I would dare say happening more so in the last year or two, and that is as soon as contact is made between the practitioner and the client, things start shaking and loosening and happening. And what we talk about is this connection, we believe, as practitioners, that happens, that our SC or our higher power begins to have an agreement to work with the SC or the higher power of the client in a beneficial way. And more we hear stories about how things, begin to happen for the client, and sometimes the practitioner too, after contact has been made. And sometimes the wait between just making an appointment and showing up, sometimes some significant shifts are made before they ever even walk through the door. Isn't that sometimes what you find happening, MJ?
Yes, and in reality, the client will not always be aware of that happening, but after we do the debriefing with them, they start connecting the dots. And we'll hear things like, oh, well, that's why I was supposed to call you. Or I found you on Dolores's website, or, this just came across my computer, but I don't know anything about it. And so we find how they end up, having a session is so interesting, but we know it's been guided by their higher power.
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Yes, absolutely. And so when clients contact us, one of the questions that they ask very often is, can sessions be done remotely? Can they be done on the telephone? Can they be done long distance? And what do we have to tell them when they ask that question, MJ?
I hear Dolores' voice right away. Yeah. No Skype. You cannot do this via Skype. And
no.
And Dolores was not against technology. What she wanted and developed in her approach was all the safeguards and safety measures for the client.
Mm-hmm.
So she says, if you were trying to conduct a session over Skype and the person is in trance and all of a sudden, their computer goes down or phone line goes down or, technical difficulties, in other words, the client and the practitioner aren't physically there. And so how do you know what's going on? You got this client that's in trance and you just lost connection, over the phone lines, computer lines, or what have you. It's just not a safe way. And I'd like to say if any listeners are aware that this may happen or they've heard about it, they need to call and let us know so we can do a follow-up, because Dolores said absolutely not, and the practitioner.
MJ,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think that's the most angry I've ever seen Dolores ever, is when people talked about doing sessions over Skype or long distance. I mean, just the fire in her eyes and shouting no. I mean, you didn't see Dolores Cannon get angry very often, but she really got angry about that because she just didn't think it was caring enough for the client. There's many people out there, other hypnosis practitioners who do other kinds of methods and who say it's perfectly fine and that the client would just go to sleep or whatever. But Dolores just cared too much about her clients, and she cared too much about anybody who was exploring their mind with QHHT. You really need somebody there with you as your advocate and, just keeping track of what's going on, because all kinds of things can happen in a session. And having somebody there who's not in trance, it's just a good thing to have somebody there sort of as your spotter.
And at this point, we do mention that during a session, we do not allow family members or friends to be present during a session, it's the practitioner and the client only.
Mm-hmm.
So
very,
if somebody
very
says,
private.
well, yes, if somebody says, well, why don't we go ahead and do Skype and I'll sit here with Mom in case something happens. No, it doesn't work that way. It truly doesn't, because our clients go to the deepest level that our brains can go without having anesthesia. And that deep level requires monitoring, which that's what the practitioners do. We watch body signs. You know, we listen. Sometimes the client's voice gets very soft. And we're right there next to the client. We don't touch the client, but we're right there. And like you said, an advocate, you know. And Dolores would say, also, she said, you haven't seen the things that I have seen. And she's done thousands and thousands and thousands of sessions. So here again, I think out of total respect, I believe what Dolores is saying, and I totally support, you know, not using Skype. It will never use Skype. So there you have it on my end.
And the idea of family, too, that's tough, because even couples or mothers and children who claim to be very close, even if you go to a practitioner in person, you still need to have your session one-on-one, because you, no matter how much you love a person in your family, if that's a family member, you're going to edit. And you need to not edit your information or your experience to get the most out of it. So it's definitely a one-on-one exploration.
Let's go ahead and convey the story that Dolores talks about when she does training to practitioners, and it was a man that was going to have the session, and his girlfriend came along, and they drove, I don't know how many hours, or they flew in. But anyway, she came in and she sat down, and Dolores explained to her that she could not be present even during the interview. She wouldn't even, you know, Dolores would not start anything, and the woman said, well, it doesn't matter. He's going to tell me everything that happens anyway, so what's the difference? And she said, no, this is one-on-one. It is very personal. And I guess there was a little debate there, but Dolores stayed firm, and finally the woman, you know, actually left in a huff because she didn't truly understand. And as soon as the woman left, the guy said, oh, I feel so relieved she won't be in here. He says, I've got things I have to say, and I can't say them with her there. So he didn't know how to tell his girlfriend, you know, couldn't be present and part of it and things like that. But with Dolores' help, they got it across, and he had a beautiful session. He was able to say things and talk about things and get answers to different subject matters that the girlfriend would have just interjected and interrupted. So it's getting back to what you said earlier about it's a very personal session, very private session. And we do record it, but again, it's the client's property. So if they can share it if they choose to, and they do not have to share it. So there you have it.
And wouldn't you say, MJ, too, even it past the idea of stories or information, when you have another human being of any kind present, their energy, their energetic field is part of the recipe of what's going on there. And it's just going to change something in some way. It's like a science experiment. You know, if you take, you know, 3 things off of the shelf and put it into a beaker, it's going to be different than if it's just 2. And I think that sessions, they're just more pure that way when it's just the 2 people.
Mhm. I'm sure you've had this comment from your clients where they'll say, "Oh, I've never shared that in such and such with anyone before," and it's we build up a trust with our client, and there are so many personal things that are released and shared, and they say, "Gosh, that feels so good to say it out loud or to tell somebody," and this is so non-judgmental that they are totally relieved, just totally relieved. But,
yes, and we give them the time to do that, don't we? That's why these sessions take so long, too. In the day and age where you have, a 15-minute, quite often, appointment with your primary care physician, this is something completely different. And we spend, multiple hours with clients to build that rapport and to get, to the bottom of some things that really are important to look at before going into the consciousness and trying to unravel what's going on. Dolores always has us talk about the client's early childhood, their upbringing, et cetera. I have some clients who are a little surprised that we want to go back that far. They kind of look at me and, you really want to know about my childhood? And yes, yes, we do.
Yeah, that's a good point. The time. I tell people, they'll say, well, how long does a session take? And I said, well, if you want a ballpark average time, 4 to 4.5 hours, depending, but I said, it can go 8 hours. And people go, 8 hours? I can't do this in 8 hours. And no, every session is not 8 hours. But what happens is we do an interview after the client comes in, and we sit down and interview where they share that, childhood and what I call the family tree. And the family tree is like, about their mother, father, grandfather, whatever relatives that, are players, so to speak, in their lives. All of those people play a role in the client's life path that they're on. And so with the client's questions, a lot of times they're associated with these key players in their lives. So that's the importance of gathering that information. And I let clients know, I said, the more information that you're comfortable in sharing really helps me to facilitate your session. Because once we get in, to the trance part, I let clients know, I said, I can't wake you up and say, hey, what about Cousin Ruth over here? You didn't tell me about her. Something like that. So, again, if, let's say, it would happen, though, that Ruth wasn't brought up in the interview part, and Ruth did come up in the session somehow, I wouldn't be startled as a practitioner. I would just start asking questions to really dig into what the connection is and all of that. So it's not, I don't want to have people think, oh gosh, what if I forget to mention something?
Yes. Actually, I have a quick interesting story about that. Not very long ago at all. Just last month, I had a client whose primary concern was the relationship between her spouse and a religious figure in their community. I mean, there was drama. There was a lot of stuff going on in her mind between her husband and this clergyman. And that was one of the biggest focus of the session. One of her prime reasons for coming for a session, she wanted to understand what was going on, what she felt about it. She had these very strong feelings about it. And come to find out, when we got into her session, her SC, her higher self said, you know what? This has nothing to do with her husband. It has nothing to do with the clergyman. But because of the relationship between the husband and clergyman, it reminded her of, and then it was exactly what you just said right there, MJ, of, I think it was a cousin and the cousin's husband, and she watched a truly unfortunate set of circumstances happen between these two people, and she was seeing some similar things happening, and she really focused so much on it, and it was so beautiful the way her SC, her higher self, came through and said, no, the real pain, the real hurt has to do with these other two people. It's just reminding her of that. And you know what? I didn't hear about either one of those people in the session, but it was very easy to see how her mind went there. And then we were able to resolve it. It was such a relief to her at the end that she didn't have to worry about her husband and this clergyman. They really weren't the problem after all.
Beautiful example, and that happens. I don't want to say frequently. I don't want to put a label on it, but it does happen. You know, it does happen because, again, the client's higher self is directing this information. So what's coming through, the client has a list of questions, and some sessions, those questions aren't as important as something else that their higher self is bringing through, because what's brought through by the client's higher self is that whole thing about, what they need to know now, right now, So I just get goosebumps about that, because every session that I facilitate is different. I can't predict the outcome. I'm always wowed at the answers that come through for the client, and the healing that takes place, and it's I just could have a session.
But they're
I think
really
people
different.
would be amazed.
They're really different. I like to tell people, they're on a continuum. Just like anything, some people find this exploration fascinating and interesting, and some are sort of amused, and some people have things validated that they've been thinking of. Other people are completely surprised. Other people's jaws are on the floor and they can't stop blinking and saying wow afterwards. Some people are just very pleasantly and gently, again, validated is the best word I can put to some of the sessions, where they just had some questions that have been nagging them, and are they on the right path? And sometimes, these sweet sessions with the SC, sometimes not with jaw-dropping miracles, just assurances, just sweet assurances that everything's fine, that they are on their right path, that they are doing what they're supposed to be doing, that they're making the decisions that, that their soul set up for them to, to make, or coming into those storylines where they have the opportunity for growth and challenges, and that they're doing fine, and they get some pats on the back from their higher self. Sometimes those are some of the sweetest sessions. And then again, there's those just drop down, jaw-dropping sessions where the amazing things happen, and they say, "Can you believe that just happened?" And I have to nod. Yes, I can. Yes, I've seen it. Yes. I've seen the miracles happen. I've seen the people take hearing aids out of their ears and throw them across the room. Other amazing things happen, and then sometimes it's just sweet. So it's all along that line, and we never know what's going to happen.
I just think we need to clarify these list of questions we've been talking about before we get into the trance.
Yeah, what kind of questions do people bring?
Yeah, these questions that we keep, this list of questions that we ask the client to write out. In my practice, I like to do a very brief phone conversation before the client even sets an appointment time, and that is, I help them prepare for their session and answer, some questions they may have about what's going to happen in that. And when we get to the list of questions, I say to them that think of it as though you were sitting across a table and your higher self, who has all the knowledge about you, is sitting across from you. What would you ask your higher self? And that seems to personalize it for them, and knowing that they can ask whatever question they're wondering about, and they will receive an answer.
That actually brings up the point, MJ, because some people ask, can they ask the big questions? Can they ask questions about, did Atlantis really exist? What's going on the moon? Et cetera. Some big questions that don't have to deal with their own personal lives. What do you say when clients ask about bringing those types of questions to a session?
I say bring it on. I just embrace their questions and their inquiry minds. I'm a facilitator. I'm not the gatekeeper of what can be asked or not asked. So therefore, if they want to ask about, maybe current events that are happening in the world, specific things, why not? It's their, if it's important to them to ask a question, that's all that matters, really. And that gets back to the individuality of the session and the purpose in that. Although, like with everything, their higher self are not going to give them, the winning lottery numbers. Or, the higher self's not going to give a specific, what date am I going to die, those types of things. But I've not had people ask about that anyway, but, it's a possibility.
That's actually a great lead into asking about the idea of the future. A lot of people ask about things, is this going to happen in the future? Is that going to happen in the future? Are those relevant questions to bring to a QHHT session?
I think it is. And the reason is, from my perspective, is the client is seeking answers and looking at, if they do A, B, C, what's the outcome going to be? What's that future going to be? In other words, the question might be, well, I've been thinking about moving to San Diego, in the next 6 months. Is that something I should do? Or, I've been looking at a new job, or things like that. Or should I, leave this current job and, get into pottery or whatever? Those are life path questions. And I guess the response that usually comes through, and here again, it's not a pat answer, but the SC responds in a guiding way. There's no definitive answers, because what happens is the client still has free will, and the client can choose to take on the advice that comes through in the session, or they can just drop it and go, nah, that's not going to work for me. So, again,
and we see both things happen, don't we? We see both things happen.
Yes, we do.
Some people take the suggestions for change and for, moving into a different path and a different way of looking at life, and monumental things can happen in their lives, and other people just kind of go back to the way things always were. And because we're creatures of habit, if there's anything humans are, is we do the same thing today pretty much that we did yesterday. And even people who have amazing sessions with lots of input, information, and healing, if they go back to everything that brought them to that point before, even with the changes that are made, they're going to slide back into that old life. So it's really about making some fresh starts, some new changes, and not everybody is willing to do that, and that's what the free will part really means. Dolores used to say that all the time too, especially people who are ill. Do you really want to get well? And the general answer is, well, of course, doesn't everyone want to be healthy? And Dolores found out, she would teach us that, a lot of people don't realize this, but when they're ill, there's something in there, often, not always, but something in there in their life. There's something that they're benefiting in some way. And that benefit may not be obvious, but sometimes it is. And sometimes people aren't willing to give up that benefit. Maybe it's being cared for by their family. Maybe they feel like that's the only way they can be cared for by their family is if they manifest some sort of illness. And not everything is like that, of course. It's just an example where she would try to think about, well, why is this person experiencing, physical hardship? There's a lot of different reasons for them to do that. And believe it or not, some people don't want to change their life enough to heal all the way.
And we honor that as practitioners because we're here to assist this beautiful process, but we're not here to demand or pressure the client into making any changes. That is totally up to the client, how they want to proceed down their life path. And in essence, if a practitioner, during the debriefing would say, well, your SC said this, so I guess you better go on an organic and diet and lose this and do that. And if, if that happens, run as fast as you can, because that's not a QHHT session. And where I'm going with that is that every client that we see, they're on a life journey, and they make decisions as they, walk their path. And we're here as support, but we're not here to intervene or disrupt their path. And everybody's life path is about choice. It's all about choice, and we can't always predict the outcome either. It's so I tell people that that say, oh, but I want to help, my cousin Ruth. I got to help her. Well, actually, you're interfering, thank you, with Ruth's path, with her life. It comes out that maybe Ruth set up a life with a lot of complications because that's what her life contract was that she put together before she came into body. We don't know that. But when we have a session, we start finding out what all we put on our plate before we came into body. So it's all individual.
It is.
I think what kind of experiences maybe people have, we could probably do 3 hours on that.
Oh gosh,
where people go in the trance, but we'll do our best to give some interesting examples. And But I would, at this point, though, I'd like to maybe talk about what Dolores has said, how QHHT sessions have changed over the years that she was conducting them, and what's happening now. And chime in here. In the beginning, when she started out, people would go to, quote unquote, a past life, and it wasn't anything out of the ordinary. One of the examples in Five Lives Remembered, her book, one of the women went into a past life as a flapper in the 1920s, 30s, and nothing significant, but it all has a purpose. Well, that went on for a while, and then the next thing that happened was Dolores discovered she was really tapped into healing powers when she conducted a session. So then people, some of the clients were going into the future. Some people found out that they had a life as a rock or the wind or a tree or a dolphin, you know, on and on and on. And then others find out that they're connected to extraterrestrial life. And they, you know, they're part of a certain group of such, or maybe they're just energy. So it's really out of the box thinking of, if people say, oh yeah, I know all about past life regression, I go back and, you know, I was Tom Sawyer back when and doing this and that, or, you know, I was this inventor and yada, yada, yada. What we've seen in our practice over the last several years has changed as well. The higher consciousness really brings through brings through higher thinking, I guess, and not very mundane lives that the client perhaps did experience, but what's brought through is a scenario where the client can learn about why they were a dolphin in one lifetime and what was that all about. So not only does the client find out, you know, what energy form they were, but the whole purpose and the meaning behind that. Because it, you know, we all know about the progression of Dolores, you know, would say each and every one of us, you know, has to go be everything. You know, we in our lifetimes over eons of time, so to speak, we have to be everything because that's how we experience the world. I'm trying to remember, did you have someone that was a rock?
Oh, my goodness. You know, what I tell my clients is I've had many rocks. It sounds kind of crazy, doesn't it?
Yes.
And I always laugh when I say that, and usually the clients will laugh as well. But it's true, and if you think about it, I mean, just take a typical life right now, the pace that most of us live, you know, on the clock and fitting so many tasks into a day. And, you know, the days just fly by and there's more and more things to do. There's always something to do and something that's needing to get done and something that's waiting to get done. And some people come in for a session with their life kind of at that frenetic pace, and their SC takes them right into being a rock, which seems kind of crazy, except for if you think about it, then imagine being able to just be in one place, piece of that, and the ability to just watch things change around you in subtle ways, in the timing and in the seasons and in lots of rocks, and many people who are too busy and too fast and too, put too much on their plate find themselves experiencing that, and the SC takes them there, and they can actually then truly add that sense of calm, stability, where things are going to be okay no matter what, even if they can't or don't find it possible for them to slow down in their lives. Believe it or not, if you go sit inside the consciousness of a rock for a little while, you can adopt a little bit of that peace and stability and bring that into your life. And that's kind of the way that works.
Yes, it does. And again, that could be another hour to go more in depth, because, people that are new to perhaps this idea, there's so much meaning there about experiencing. Everything has energy. Everything in this 3D world has energy. And so a rock has energy, and we are, in essence, energy. So it's experiencing the different kinds of energy that manifest in a 3D world is what it's all about. And gets back to that observation and things.
One of the most interesting, I got to actually meet this woman, believe it or not. One of the most interesting, I don't remember which convoluted book it was, but it was during the class that I took with Dolores back in 2008, July of 2008 in Fayetteville, Arkansas. The woman was in the classroom. She'd actually had a session with Dolores, and her session was in one of the chapters in Dolores's Convoluted series, where she was a machine part. She was a piece of a machine. And I think that can kind of stretch people's minds about what this method can do to bring somebody into a place where they're experiencing what the consciousness of being, a cog in a machine might possibly be. And it sounds so far out there, but it's truly one of the more striking explorations I know for me, thinking about this method and the things that we can learn about themselves, and things like teamwork and things like appreciation for even an inanimate object.
Candace, I know you have a beautiful real experience with a client that you shared with the practitioners in our forum, and I think that is a great example, if you would share that, how as practitioners we keep digging and digging to get to so the client knows what they are, what they're experiencing. And what I'm referring to is I think it was a gentleman that he kept seeing darkness around him. And I think it was a good 30 minutes to help him through that darkness. And if you would share that briefly, because I think the outcome is, I think it's going to surprise people.
Oh my gosh! I'm going through the Rolodex of memories in my head. Is this the one where I did the little video thing? Was it that one? There's a couple that I'm thinking of right now. One, yes, he was. He only saw. First, he saw nothing, and then he seemed like he might have a little bit of color, and then he was moving through that, and MJ, I think they're kind of mixing up in my head. Anyway, I know one fellow was, and if it's not the right one, it's at least the same kind of session. One fellow ended up feeling himself being kind of contained and in darkness, and he was insisting that nothing was going on. But as we explored just sensations. Well, what are your impressions? One of the best words Dolores ever used. What are your impressions? And if you give them an impression, to think about. Well, it seems tight, it seems dark, and the next thing you know, this person ended up being a seed. I mean, he was a seed, and he was breaking through the pod that was holding him, you know, in darkness and in this tight place. And when he finally felt himself burst out of it, going up through the ground and moving towards the sunshine and becoming this live, invigorating kind of plant, you know, reaching towards the sky and pushing his roots down. And of course, it ended up being an amazing analogy with his own life, you know, that he was the potential. The potential was there for everything that he ever wanted to, you know, all of the dreams that he could reach for and the roots that he wanted to put down with his family, etc. And that's another beautiful thing that the SC will do is kind of orchestrate these experiences in this richly symbolic way to bring, you know, hope and direction and peace and balance in our clients' lives. And I don't know if it's the right one you were mentioning, but I'm remembering that one right now. The one.
It's the right one for our purpose of helping people to understand what can happen. But I know you've had, you know, other sessions similar. But like you said, there's a commonality there of, I'm sure when you talk to the client in the interview, the client didn't say, oh, yeah, I knew I was a seed in the past life.
You're right.
You know?
Absolutely no idea.
And, you know, as a practitioner, I couldn't have guessed what that client was going to be experiencing. And it's exciting as a practitioner to hear and discover along with the client what they are experiencing during that part. So that's great. Let's talk a little bit about future lives. And that would be, Dolores also has taught us about we can do group regressions where we have a group of people get together and this is an experience that helps them kind of get acquainted with what it would be like in a light hypnotic state. And some people go to the future. We help them just kind of lay the groundwork there, and you know, people are seeing and describing buildings and people and that in some type of a community in the future. So that can happen. It's out there. If their higher self, their SC, is wanting them to know that, and it's important. But again, tell people that is only one possibility of future. That is not a definitive future. So in other words, you know, we don't live our life on that being the future. Because if we try to live our life and direct our life to that specific happening, we're going to miss out on so many things that are happening right now in this moment. So, again, it's, I think to kind of sum the experiences up, if people want to take some time and read any of Dolores' books, any of the Convoluted Universe books, there are just tons and tons of sessions in there with information about various topics, and it's all true. You know, it's all valid information.
And you know what I like?
They'll get a sampling of what can happen.
Those books can be, you know, daunting. They're quite big and thick, but most of Dolores' books, particularly the Convoluted series, their chapters, each chapter is standalone. You can just open that, you know, book up, and it's kind of like a collection of short stories. She does group them, of course, and she she talks about different subject matters and different theories that come up with them. But they aren't books that you need to sit down and read from cover to cover to make any sense. You can just flip through them and find sessions to read about, and that's a fun way actually of reading some Dolores books sometimes too. Is not from front to back, but just pick it out and see which one pops up for you if you want to read them. But quite easy to read, and I think. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it would be helpful for our audience to know how Dolores accumulates that information and how she puts it into a book form. So when people are reading her books, they understand the kind of the backstory of how that information was put together. So in other words...
Yeah, please share with us. Please do.
The main thing to know when you're reading those books is Dolores' client, let's say his name was, John. And John's the client throughout. And she weaves this chapter together, but it's not John as a sole client. John represents accumulation, conglomerate, if you will, of hundreds of clients. And what Dolores does is, over the years and thousands of sessions, etc., what she does, she starts hearing information, the same information come through, and she collects that information. And her thinking is that it is valid information when it comes through time and time again through tons of clients, and clients that are in different parts of the world, and they don't even know one another. But this information comes through. So she pulls this information together, and that's how these chapters are written in the book, and that's why it's on a subject matter. So I wanted to let people know, if you read a chapter and think, oh, I'm going to have a session like that, just know that it's an accumulation of information, and she's bringing it together to provide people that read her books information about questions, universal questions, that are out there. So, again, a person can start anywhere in her collections. And I'm going to go briefly on her books because the initial books, The 5 Lives Remembered, it was close to 10 years before she even got that one published. And because the world wasn't ready, the publishers didn't know what to do with that information. She was so far ahead of the curve. New Age wasn't even a term back then. So she, what's the word? Trailblazer.
That's the word for Dolores Cannon, for sure.
Yeah.
She's ahead of her time.
And then I'm going to fast forward a little to a book called 3 Waves of Volunteers in the New Earth.
Yeah.
And that is that'll just explode people's minds, really, in a good way.
That was a seminal book. That changed so many people's lives. So many people coming into my office. That book is just huge. She'll be known for that book.
Yes. Yeah. And what the book is about, the 3 waves, is related to what was happening here on Earth right after around 1944, 45-ish, right in there, when the atomic bomb was could have destroyed the Earth, and our watchers, our guardians, could not interfere, but they had to come up with something to, help us get away from destroying the earth. And so the call went out, as Dolores said, for volunteers to come in and help bring light to the planet. And so the first volunteers to come in were first wavers, and they're pioneers in and of themselves. A lot of them had not been in physical body prior to that call that went out, that came into physical body at that time. And then the next wave that came in was, maybe 20 years a little bit more maybe, later, and that's the second wave. And those people came in to hold light and to just bring calmness and balance. And then the third waves is basically all the children that are coming in. They have their gifts, they're aware of them, they see the world very differently. They're here to change the world and be our teachers. So that's a real quick synopsis. And then that book goes on to what the new earth is all about, the new earth and the old earth, and how that looks. And so through a QHHT session is probably the best way to figure out which you're one of the waves, first, second, or third. Right. And I'm a first waver, so there you have it. I didn't even know what the term was. I didn't even know what it was. But again, somehow I met Dolores and I had a session, and that's how I discovered that. So, and then I read the 3 Ways of Volunteers. I thought it was somebody, the universe just handed me a manual about life.
Right.
That's how I read that book. Everything made sense. Everything.
Yep. So many people say that. So many people, even people who haven't read the book, who've just watched Dolores talk about this book and some of these concepts in some of her YouTube videos, will say that they felt like she was talking just to them, and and how important it was that that book was written. Quite an important piece of work. Absolutely.
So Dolores has left quite a legacy. Like you mentioned, there are some umpteen YouTube videos that some of them are up to 2 hours, and I listen to them. I go back and re-listen. Seems like her message just has so many meat, so much knowledge in them, and it's all valid. And I can't say enough about that. And then all of her books, and Convoluted 5 just came out. She had the book just about ready to go to the publisher, and her daughter finalized it, and it just came out within the last month. So there's a couple more books that are in the queue that Dolores, she would always tell us when we would go to our reunion or conference or training, and she'd go, "Oh yeah, I'm writing books all the time. I've got 3 or 4 going at any one time." And so here you go. Even though she's left the physical, there's manuscripts that are sitting there waiting to be published. So if people are wanting to know if how many books, well, she's still writing them. So there you have it.
There's still piles and piles of information on her desk and around her house. I was blessed to be able to see some of those. It was quite stunning. I think the book's maybe still coming. Absolutely. One of the things I think that's important to mention is just how simple and elegant Dolores' method was. There are people out there, other healers, other people doing other kinds of hypnosis or energy or other kinds of methods, and so many are valid. And Dolores was so humble in this way. She would say there's a lot of different ways to get healing and information and miracles. to manifest. QHHT is just another way, but it was her way. But what I'd like to mention is just how down to earth and really supremely and elegantly simple her method is. There aren't a lot of hoops to jump through. It's not very complex. In the end, if you look back at the parts of the session and how we bring clients to view these, parts of their consciousness and things about themselves, it's really very elegantly simple and direct. And her books are written in the same way, in a very down-to-earth way, even though she's talking about ETs sometimes and other things that, can bend some people's minds. Really, her method is beautiful and simple and accessible. And those of us who are practicing, within her legacy, that she left to us, are quite aware of that. And we lovingly replicate that simplicity and that elegance, and we invite our clients to have their own adventures and find their own answers in the mystery that is their own consciousness and in their own mind. I always say you need to be Indiana Jones in your own head, right? You kind of need to go there. Actually, that brings me to a question. MJ, what do you say to people when they say, I'm afraid if I go and have a session, I'm afraid I'll just make it up. I'll make it up and it won't be real. How do you answer that question?
Well, depends on their imagination. Dolores would say, if you were going to make this up, is this the information you would have to make up? And what she was saying is to believing and trusting in oneself and not trying to judge the information or quantify it, analyze it, et cetera, et cetera. The information that comes through is from that person. And that person's higher self is bringing forth messages. But some people say, oh, yeah, I made it up. And Dolores would say, some of her clients would say, oh, I just made it all up and walk out after the session. Well, that's what they believed, and that's what they believe. But a session isn't really conducted in the left side of the brain where we analyze everything and line everything up. We tap into the right side of the brain where the imagination plays. And it's unlimited possibilities. So in other words, if we're trying to stay in the left side of our brain and come up with, specific, sequential, detailed information, then that's all it is. It's probably made up and pushing. But if you allow yourself to the right side and have a connection with the higher self, just open your mind, and whatever comes through, comes through. And you can pick it apart, next day or whatever you want to. But allowing yourself to be playful and free is so important, because this is where we get into people that they say, we have them in trance, but they won't allow themselves to relax and allow the flow, and they'll say, oh, I think I'm still awake, or I'm doing this or I'm doing that. And what can happen sometimes is that their everyday conscious mind starts, wanting to take things over and prevent a connection. And as practitioners, we have been taught how to, to manage that situation as well and to allow that connection. Unfortunately, there are people that want to be in control of their world, what happens in a session, everything. And a lot of that control perhaps is shutting doors, and they're not ready for answers. And they may not want to admit that, and that's fine. And that can happen. And there's other people that, just say, well, let's just see what happens. I'm just going to enjoy
and
the
that's
session.
the best way, isn't it? That's the best way to show up for one of these sessions, is to think of it as an opportunity and an adventure, and not, Dolores would say this. Dolores would say 90% of what happens in a session is up to the client.
Yeah. And
sometimes I will have clients look at me and kind of blink. But I love that quote of Dolores, because this really, we're the facilitator and we are the guide, and we will do everything in our power to provide a safe place and a safe platform, and with this amazing method of Dolores to take you there. But you have free will, and you've got to want to go there. And sometimes when people ask me or make that statement about making it up, I think I've been finding myself lately, MJ, saying, yes, you made it up. You've made everything up. You've made up your entire life, even up until now. Everything is made up. This table is made up. Somebody thought about this table, and they made it up in their head, and then they drew a picture, and then here it is. Yes, that is a made-up table right there. Everything is made up. Everything. I kind of like that.
You create
idea.
your own reality. You want to control your reality to look at a certain way and function a certain way, then that is your reality. That's what your life is. So, I think before we start taking questions, we do need to talk about the healing component, which is a cornerstone of a session. Dolores, when she was developing the method, she discovered that she was tapping into the higher power, and it offered healing. And she said, after a couple of years or whatever the time frame was, she started looking back on clients, and she said, she says, I've discovered that the healing power was always there. I just didn't recognize it right away. And then she would talk about how, the higher power she was working with would continually feed her bits of information because she couldn't handle everything, she said. The human brain can't process it all. But anyway, let's get back to the healing. Once we get into the deeper level of trance, there is a healing component, and we ask for a body scan of the client. Again, we're not touching the client at all. And we can also identify key areas that the client has shared with us in the interview, illnesses or aches, pains, or whatever their physical body is experiencing. And that's usually part of those list of questions. And what will happen is the subconscious, the higher self here, will be doing the body scan, and we can still talk and ask questions. And we can even ask, how's the scan going? Where are you at? And the response will be, oh my gosh, we're in her chest, and there's so, her heart is been blocked, protected. There's this steel, a coat of armor around it or something like that. So it's very interesting to hear how they do go through the body and how they start to break up congestion and describe what part of the body they're working on. I know there was one client, they were in the brain, they said, oh my God, there's so much clutter here, it's so disorganized. No wonder she's not thinking clearly, and they described the process of cleaning that out. And there's no harm that comes to the client. They don't, it's not like an open wound and they're screaming. No. The healing is profound, but it's not sensationalized, so to speak. And if the client has not identified anything, that's fine. We still ask for a healing scan to take place. And the other thing that we've discovered is that the higher power that we're working with, a lot of times we'll discover a certain area of the body that the client's not even aware of that's having difficulty. And this higher power goes in and heals it. Now, fast forward to the debriefing and aftermath. If the client says, oh, no, I don't believe any of that, and they can't fix it and whatever, the client has now disregarded that healing for themselves through choice.
Yeah.
So, again, it gets back to free will. But, you know, some of the healing that has taken place is, and there's explanations of, you know, why the client is having certain physical symptoms, because everything that's physical in a disease process is either a symptom or a process, and it's a message from our higher self that's trying to come through to get our attention. And there's books out there about, you know, certain disease processes that, like thyroid would be, you know, not speaking your truth and standing up for yourself. Scoliosis would be, you know, the fear of being judged and not standing up for themselves. Kidney problems can be holding on to things. Digestive problems can be holding on to things. I mean, it makes sense. It doesn't take a rocket science to figure it out, but everything has a purpose and a meaning. Very quickly, I will mention a client that she had heavy metals in her body. And when we went through the scanning, what she told me afterwards was when the scanning occurred, she could feel this wave of energy going down her body. From the top of her head, all just a wave of energy until it got to her ankles. And it stopped. And the answer that came through during trance was they would relieve and take out as much heavy metals as possible, but they were leaving just a little bit as a reminder, and that had a purpose in her life. And a couple of days after her session, she called me and said, oh, MJ, she said, I don't know what to do. My body is itching. It's broke out. It's just itching. She said, I can't even stand to have clothes on. And so we talked about it, and what was happening was the body was excreting the heavy metals. So it manifested in a physical way. And she decided to take some Benadryl for the itching. But it was a very interesting process for her. She wasn't harmed or hurt in any way, but there is a manifestation that can occur in the body itself to let the person know that these toxins are being flushed out, being relieved. Sometimes,
MJ,
go ahead.
I was going to say, you mentioned scoliosis. Brought to mind a woman who came and had issues with that in her own body, and her daughter did, and also her mother did. And what I wanted to just mention was that we always ask, what's the root cause of any physical problems? What's the root cause? And sometimes it's very obvious, and the root cause is something going on in the present lifetime, and then sometimes it's other lifetimes, which is how this whole healing method of past life regression even, came to be. But this particular session was so beautiful and so amazing, and Dolores has a couple scoliosis sessions that are amazing to talk about too. But this woman actually went back to a life in Ireland where she and her family were really persecuted by the Catholic Church there at that time. And her higher self, her SC, told her that her scoliosis was a manifestation for her and through her ancestral line, so for her daughter and for her mother and others, about bending to the will of the Catholic Church. That's just, absolutely matches what you said before about scoliosis, not standing up for yourself. And so it was the story. It was this story of this family and this, this piece of history that just carried on into this woman experiencing this, in the 21st century here in America, far removed from either of those stories. That story stayed in her DNA. It stayed in her family line. And once the story was uncovered, she could release it. And she left without any pain and standing up straighter. These are the amazing things that are available to people who have sessions.
Well, we have some wonderful stories about some of our practitioners that have had a session with Dolores and miracles that have happened. People come in with oxygen and just a whole list, of health problems. Their medical records probably, 5 inches thick, I don't know, but just very severe, life-threatening, were to the point where the doctors say, we can't do anything else for you. We've done everything. We can do palliative care. In other words, we can try to keep you comfortable, but we can't do anything else. And, Laura, one of our practitioners, her session with Dolores is she walked in with oxygen and difficulty walking, breathing, coughing, lung problems, the whole 9 yards.
She had multiple organ failure.
Yes. Yep. And she came out without oxygen and she's living, she got her life back, let's put it that way, and was told she has work to do. She's got a purpose here, and she is currently a QHHT practitioner, and she's in Oklahoma.
Yes, she is.
She'll share her story. It's just beautiful. But we've had other yeah. So it's there for the taking, so to speak.
MJ,
let me
interrupt.
And want it.
Let me interrupt you just by offering our call-in number to anyone who may be listening who might have questions. The chat room's been really quiet. There's really no questions coming up there, but I'd like to invite anyone who might want to call in and ask questions about QHHT and what they may have questions about sessions that we haven't answered so far. The call-in number is area code 646-716-8890. That's 646-716-8890. Or you can log into the chat room and type out a question there. MJ and I would be happy to tackle those. We could talk about QHHT all night and into next week easily. But if you have questions, we'd be happy to take them. MJ?
I would love to hear questions from listeners because that's that individuality. What do people want to know? What questions do they have? What's important to them? That's a big part of all of this too. I mean, yes, we can give information, we can share stories, etc. But boy, that connection with potential clients or clients that have had a session and a good experience, we'd love to hear from you as well. There's a question here. How long is a QHHT session? I think we talked about that early on, but we'll go ahead and respond. That being, an average time is around 4 to 4.5 hours, and that's average. And how that breaks down in itself is the interview process where the client is sharing the information, as we defined earlier. That can be an average of 1.5 to 2 hours. Now, again, that's an average. It's very individual. Once we go into trance, Dolores' guidelines for us have been a maximum of 2 hours. Now, there are exceptions to that. And somebody may say, well, my God, 2 hours, that's a long time. But we always ask clients after they come out of trance, well, how long do you think you're under? And the clients will say, 20 minutes, maybe half hour. And we'll say, well, it's been, an hour and 50 minutes or 2 hours. And they're, jaw drop, because there is no time, really, once you get into the trance component. So then after bringing the client safely out of trance, then there's a debriefing time. And again, that can be anywhere from 30 minutes to another hour to whatever. So it's really up to the client and what they need that particular session. And for me, I only book one session a day. I don't do back-to-back, a morning time and an afternoon time. And I've had people say, well, can't you squeeze me in? I go, no. And I explain to them that I devote that day and that session to a client, and it's based on their needs. There you have it. How about your
MJ,
session?
how would you, excuse me?
I was going to say, can you add to that time frame with sessions for your clients?
Yes, for me, my sessions tend to go a little longer. I don't know. I would say for me, mine probably average 5.5 hours or so. I'm not sure why. Although I have to say a couple, 3 lately have been very efficient, shall we say, and quite spectacular in the healing department. As a matter of fact, I guess that kind of brings me to a point, which is in the structure of a QHHT session, in general, the client has some sort of experience. And then when they're finished viewing this experience or having this experience, we speak to the higher power or the SC that MJ's been talking about during the show. But every once in a while we have a client whose SC deems it unnecessary for them to have an experience of any kind, really, like a past life or a future life or life as a rock or anything like that. And they just go straight to the healing, straight to the questions. And that really does minimize the time that one needs to be in trance to some of the answers to these questions, or to kind of set the stage for the SC to come through to answer some of these questions. So we do have those kinds of sessions sometimes, and they're very efficient and can be very powerful and somewhat shorter than regular sessions. And there's more of those happening these days. Some people say humanity's just ready for that. These kinds of sessions didn't really happen with Dolores early on, and they may have been sprinkled throughout the years. And I think if you gather a group of QHHT practitioners in a room, you would find that as we discussed sessions, we probably have more of those these days.
Yeah, I would agree. On my website, I, just try to give time frames, but I struggled with even putting time frames on there. But people that, want to know, a little bit more detailed, I just put ranges on there. But
sure,
you're right. It's this process is so individual that we could be with a client, for 4 hours, or, we've had some practitioners that are with their clients 8 hours. And some people probably would pass out thinking, I couldn't be with anybody for 8 hours. Well, the time just goes because people start venting and they want to know, and that whole interview process and the debriefing takes on its own time frame. And we just allow whatever's needed. And like you said, some people, it's short, but the quality is still there. And it's all about the client and what they need. Yeah.
MJ, how would you talk to our listeners about the process of choosing a practitioner to go see? How would you talk to them about that? There's different labels and qualifications and levels of training, and some of that has brought a little bit of confusion to people out there. How would you answer that question? What do those mean, and how do you find the right practitioner for you?
I think it's an equivalent of how do you find a doctor, a dentist, any type of professional. Do your homework. Dolores' website has a list of practitioners all over the world and their contact information. So, find someone in your area and then give them a call and talk to them. Also on the website, it also identifies, if you've had level 1 or level 2 training, which at least gives you that piece of information. But getting on the phone and talking with the practitioner and seeing and feeling and listening, is this a good match? Do you feel a good match with this practitioner? And then also, you can ask around in your community. Someone might have had a session or know that person. So, but how people find us are interesting in and of its way, too. I've had clients say, I don't know what it was, but I was directed to you. And they're talking about a guidance. And so I go, okay. And they follow that guidance or they follow their gut. I think that's the best way. It's like, for a doctor or dentist, I go and look at their bio, go to their website, do the logistics of it, and then go from there. But I think talking to the practitioner after you've done that background check, so to speak, and get that information, see if it's a fit. Does
you
it
can get
feel
a lot
right?
you can get a lot of information out of just looking at someone's photograph and seeing how they describe themselves. You can get a real sense of people that way. But I'm with MJ. Pick up the phone, talk to them live if possible, and get a sense of their energy over the phone and see if you're a match, because there may be something about that person that doesn't quite sit right with you. And if that's the case, in your gut, you feel that, well, listen to your gut. Maybe there's somebody else out there. But I did want to mention that even the level 1 practitioners, those who've taken Dolores' class, have all of the tools to bring you to a place of discovering the answers that you're looking for. And sometimes people will say, well, I need to see a level 3 practitioner because, I've got this very serious illness. And I always have to say, it just really doesn't work that way. It just really doesn't work that way. Yes, a level 3 practitioner has definitely been through more training. They've had more experience. They've been through more evaluations, etc. they probably have more stories to tell, but it really doesn't work that way. Dolores' method is so pure, so brilliant, so amazing. Some of the most spectacular healings and some of the best stories that I've ever heard from others who've had a session have been from students who've practiced on each other for the very first time in a hotel room. And I just want to make sure that everyone out there knows that. As long as the person has a huge heart and as long as they practice Dolores' method with great integrity, they can lead you into the place where you can access that part of yourself to heal yourself and find your own answers.
Very true. It's, again, using the other professional analogy, someone can have credentials, like a long Santa list, but then you pick up the phone or you meet them in person, you go, oh my goodness, this isn't going to work for me.
Right.
So you have to take everything into consideration. Again, the higher self is helping you and guiding you along the way. So when one of my clients drove about 4 hours to get to my location, and I know geographically there were many practitioners along the way, but he said I was supposed to see you. And that, there was no other information other than, so he was listening to his inner guidance, and however he made the choice, that's how that happened. It has nothing to do with the plus or minuses of any practitioner, within that driving time that he could have seen. It has nothing to do with that. It has to do with he made a decision based on an inner guidance system, and he trusted it. And so that's where that's at.
Very good.
Trust your gut.
How about that recording that we send home with the clients, MJ? Can you tell our listeners how important that recording is, the digital recording of their session?
Okay. Very important. It is additional healing opportunity. Let's define what the recording is. Once the client is in trance and we get to the part about we're going back to, an important time and date, and then that information starts coming through the client with information, we start recording then. And then we close out as we bring the client out. So the recording is not about the interview process of all the information they shared. The recording is the interaction the client is having with their higher self and the responses and questions that are taking place. So what happens is, after we bring the client out and we do a short debriefing, the clients may think they remember everything, a little bit, or nothing at all. It varies. It truly varies. And some clients will say, oh, yeah, I remember everything. I think I was even awake, yada, yada, yada. Well, they go home and then they decide to listen to their recording, and they will find that every time they listen to the recording, they will hear information that triggers thinking or healing that's gone before. And the best example I can give is myself. I still listen to my previous session. And sometimes I feel like, was I even there? In other words, there's new information coming through, but I was there, you know? But it's that power of information from the higher self that comes through, and it triggers different thinking based on, today. What do I need to hear from it today? And that's the power of it. And we send those out in various ways. You know, we can put it on a CD. We can send it via email, you know, for MP3 listening. But it's confidential. It only goes to the client, and it's, you know, theirs for the utilization of additional healing and answers. And some clients listen to it to fall asleep and just allow that recording to continue, and healing still happens. You know, that information is still flowing through. So that's the power of that recording. The flip side, I had a client recently. This was interesting. I told her recording was ready, and she sent me a request. She says, "No, I'm not ready to listen to it. Just keep it." And I thought, okay. So it's ready when she's ready, but I'm not going to judge it. It's not my decision. But I thought that was a little interesting.
That is interesting.
I will say this particular client had some very obvious control issues, and she was aware of them. But you can see where this might play out, where she's not quite ready. But that's her decision.
It is her decision. I like to tell clients that they had just had an adventure, but the adventure really doesn't have to stop that day. And that listening to the session can help deepen it. And I like to say, too, because we're all busy people. So I like to say, you know, make some time, carve out some time to listen to it actively, where you're really not doing much of anything else. You're really listening to it. You'll be surprised what you miss. Like MJ said, you'll hear things that you might not have allowed yourself to absorb the first time around. But then the recording becomes something, just like MJ said before, something that you might listen to sort of subliminally. Because when your consciousness hears some of that, it truly builds, you know, the neural pathways in your brain so that you have the chance, the ability to go down that new path and to sustain the healing rather than go back to the person that you were before you walked through the doors to have your session. And so listening to your session is really important. But and MJ, you're a nurse, so you know this, you know, patient compliance, right? There's this thing, you know, people, you know, you need to brush your teeth, you need to take your vitamins, you need to do your exercise, you need to, you know, compliance. And there's compliance issues with QHHT as well, you know. The SC may have very direct advice about, you know, I think you need to end this relationship. You need to remove this from your diet. You need to do this. You need to do that. And but free will comes in there, and it's just like anything. And the people will go home and they'll either, you know, decide to end that relationship and change that thing in their diet, or make other changes in their lives, or not. And some people kind of shrug their shoulders and don't take the advice of their higher self, even if they've traveled, even if they, you know, spent an entire day with a practitioner. There are people out there who will just decide not to make those changes in their life, and that's always surprised me a little bit. But then again, when you think of human nature, not so much, because we really are creatures of habit. And, yeah.
But sometimes I think if they would really just take quiet time and think, well, why did I even want a session? What drove me to have a session? You know, kind of come full circle. And it's, well, I had a session because blah, 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 blah. And a lot of them will be in their list of questions. And so they'll get the answer. So why not take advantage of a game plan, so to speak, that their higher self gave during the session? You know, even try it and see what's the worst that can happen, kind of thing. But again, respectfully, it is still free will and their decision. And I think it's good to remind people as well, potential clients, that QHHT sessions are not set up for, you know, a weekly session for the next 4 to 6 weeks. That's not how this rolls out. This session, we may never see our clients again for another session. Or it may be, you know, a time frame where they're ready and they want more. Call up, you know, for another session. But Dolores, I don't know, you know, she'll say, she said, I never see my clients again. They come in for their session, they get what they need, and that's it. So that's, you know, a different thinking as well. And we don't go after the client and do checkup calls, you know, like, well, how are things going? And did you do this and that? No, we're not. That's not how it works either. We love to hear from our clients. We love to get feedback. But again, it's their choice. We're not going to dog them to do a follow-up. Unless they say, you know, I've had clients say, well, MJ, will you give me a call in a couple of weeks? Or they'll say, I'll call you in a couple of weeks. And that's always a great, because it's nice to see, you know, how people have made choices after a session and how their life has changed. Those beautiful stories, you know.
There really are great stories. I have a good story from, and I'm not seeing any questions in the chat room or in the phone queue just yet. So I want to remind everyone we're to the place where we are going to take some questions, or we're going to wrap up pretty soon. But I'll remind the listeners of the call-in number again. It is area code 646-716-8890. That's 646-716-8890 in case anyone has any questions. But I thought you might like this story, MJ. I had a client just a couple weeks ago, and she had an amazing session. She knew a little bit about Dolores. She was a fairly traditional, she was a counselor herself, trained in hypnotherapy, said she's not ever been able to be hypnotized by colleagues, which is always an interesting way of going into a session, thinking, well, okay, we'll see what happens. But she was beautifully relaxed and had an amazing couple experiences. Her first experience, she found herself to be a Native American type of person, watching strangers come ashore, etc. And we explored a little bit of that lifetime. And then she did what we sometimes call leapfrogging. She leapfrogged into another life where she was in the water. At first, she didn't even know where she was. She thought she was in the sky, and she said she saw clouds, but nothing like she knew were to be clouds. She was trying to figure out where she was, and I asked her if she could move, and she was moving, and then suddenly she hit the surface of the water, and then she realized, oh, I'm in the water. And she turned around and she saw a fish. She was like, oh, there's a fish behind me. And she was, well, the next thing you knew, you could tell that she was a mermaid. I was asking her to describe her body, and she was describing it. But she would never say the word mermaid. I mean, she was so stunned by this fact. And she actually, the last day of her life, she was caught by humans in a net, and they brought her up into the boat, and it was awful, and she ended up dying. That's how she passed away. And she came out of the session, and the SC so brilliantly told her why it showed her these two different lives and how it played into her world. And it was fascinating because during the debrief, she was fine with the Native American life, but the part about being a mermaid, she just was stunned. She really was kind of like in denial. Her belief system was fine with the idea of past lives, but she really, even though she was aware of Dolores, this idea of being a mermaid was just really almost a little bit too much. She couldn't even really say the word mermaid, but that's certainly what she was. And she was kind of questioning whether or not that could be real. And, I did what we all do. We talked about how it applied to her life, and it beautifully did. She loved swimming and some other things. But here's the part that I really like. So she drove herself home, and that evening she was sitting on the deck with her husband and talking a little bit about the session, and just still very mesmerized by the whole thing. And MJ, this big, beautiful red cardinal flies in from the trees nearby and lands on the deck railing within a couple feet of her and her husband, and just starts singing to them. She said that she's never seen a cardinal do that ever in her life. It just stayed there singing. She said it was like 3 or 4 minutes of pure singing, very, very close to her and her husband. Her husband was stunned as well that this cardinals are usually pretty shy birds, would come that close and sing just this beautiful song, kind of looking back and forth between them. And she emailed me to told me that. And, of course, I'm giggling and gleeful about this story because I know exactly what that was. She said, was that a coincidence? What was that? I said, I know exactly what that was. What would you say that was, MJ?
Well, now you're getting into how Dolores is still working with people around the world and practitioners, and a cardinal is her kind of her icon since she left.
Yes.
Has shown up in various places, where you wouldn't expect a cardinal to be. So that is beautiful. That leads me into what type of beings might show up figuratively during a session. And that is, since Dolores has transitioned from the physical, Dolores has come through sessions. And clients don't even know Dolores. But Dolores and the SC work together, and she comes through, and she'll have messages for the client and sometimes the practitioner. I mean, it just kind of knocks your socks off how our mentor is still working hard from, the other side of the veil, so to speak. Now, that might blow people's minds and go, but it's real. When Dolores transitioned, there was practitioners sharing stories all over the globe, how Dolores became part of the sessions that they were doing. And it just gives you goosebumps thinking what that's all about. I've had Dolores come through a session, and I let people know, when we do the interview, to let them know, I said, this is what Dolores is doing since she transitioned. And, if you're willing and you want to allow Dolores to come through and, give any information, that you can do that, but only with your permission. And most of them are like, oh, yeah, that'd be great. but they don't know her.
Right.
Now, Dolores doesn't take over the session or anything like that, but at some point, there's a time frame where she'll come through with a message, and it's a beautiful message of sorts. The other thing that can happen is a loved one that has passed will come through with a message for the client.
Yeah.
And they're all working with the higher power, the higher consciousness of the client. And I've seen emotional healing happen when that comes through. A mother comes through, the client is an adult son. It's very powerful, very, very powerful. I've also had animals come through, and nothing was said in the interview, no request, nothing, but the animal comes through with the message, and that's a beautiful healing moment as well. So there's so many possibilities when we open to that higher power. It's just so beautiful, so beautiful.
It really is. It really is beautiful work, and and I've been doing this for more than 7 years. Next, when I finish out this year and go into next, I'll be into the 8th year, and it's still such fascinating work, and it's so gratifying, and it's always changing, and it's amazing, and the potential for discovery and healing is extraordinary. You just mentioned animals, and we didn't say this before, but when we talked about the surrogate healing, in our own family, we've had amazing healings of animals doing sessions, between two humans, asking for and aligning with and watching healing happen for, our companion animals. The potentials, the various things that can happen in these sessions are just astounding. And more of the veil is thinning, our abilities are increasing. And we've been told that one of the reasons that, Dolores made her exit at this time was because of humanity being poised at this juncture in our evolution where we're reaching for more abilities and more possibilities to sort of expand past what we've always thought was possible for us. And the more that you believe is possible, the more that is possible. And that's kind of the epitome of a QHHT session, opening up your mind and believing in magic and miracles and transformation, and kind of watch it happen, either very quickly or very, more gently and gradually, and neither one is better than the other. Because that
very true.
That's another thing to talk about right there. Dolores talked about, instant healing. And in the session, sometimes the higher power, the SC, will absolutely provide and agree to healing. And sometimes the clients stand up and they are absolutely physically changed in so many ways. Sometimes cartilage and knees are rebuilt. Sometimes, bones are repaired. Achilles tendons repaired. Hearing restored, etc. But sometimes the healing is more gradual, and it takes time for it to manifest. And neither is better than the other. Sometimes the absolute instantaneous ones they make for a better show, but it's not always the best way. Sometimes with people's belief systems or with their lifestyle or who knows what. We can only surmise. We can only guess at some of these mysteries, why this works. But some people leave, and then the healing gradually comes about. And that was my own case with my own session with Dolores Cannon. I was granted instant healing in that demonstration class, and I sat up. I was ready to be completely healed, by having a session with the great Dolores Cannon there with the classroom looking on. And I sat up, and my body hurt just as much as it did when I laid down. But you know what? It slowly left me. The pain left me as I began to do what my higher self instructed. And pretty soon, I left that physical challenge behind me. And that's another way that people heal in these sessions.
That is so true. It's, again, we can't predict if it's going to be instantaneous or if it's an ongoing process. As practitioners, we can ask the higher self of the client, can this be completely taken care of today? Or is this a work in progress? And the SC will say, we're still working on it, and they'll be working on it during the session and stuff. Or they'll say, nope, it's all done. Or, over the next couple of days. Sometimes the message comes through about medications. And it's something like, they can start tapering off medications. Now, again, that's something that people need to decide. Are they willing to do that? Do they want to talk to their doctor? It's their call. It's their call. So if you want to, I went through my own detox because I had some chronic disease processes, and I went through my own detox in a very slow, methodical way. But it worked. Again, it's individual, so individual. I think we should mention how listener that would like a session with either you or myself can get in contact with us besides going to Dolores' website, and they can look at the list of practitioners there. So we'll give Dolores' website, which is www.dolorescannon.com. And on there, you'll see, the menu, and you can find a practitioner anywhere around the world. They're listed there, and they're listed by country, and then the United States is listed by, region. So there are tons of practitioners out there. Over, 4,000, I think? Is it? I don't even know.
There's a lot.
It keeps changing. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
They can find me. I'm in Loveland, Colorado. And they can find me through the website, which is www.mj, and my last name, Olinger, OLINGER.com. And what about you, Candace?
Oh, thank you so much. Well, we have what I do want to mention, that those who participate in our dedicated practitioner community, we have special photo listings at DoloresCannonQHHT.com. That's DoloresCannonQHHT.com with worldwide listings by country, state, city, etc. With photos, which can help you find the right practitioner for you. And you can find me on Dolores' website, of course, yes, but newearthjourney.com. That is newearthjourney.com. And my practice is here in the heartland in Kansas, near the city of Wichita. And MJ, you and I have been at it for more than 2 hours, and we don't really have any questions in the chat room, and I don't know that we have any. Let me check the call-ins. I don't see any one of our callers holding up their hands to ask questions, so maybe we've done just a really great job tonight and sort of answered everyone's questions without them having to ask very many. Good job.
Well, there's
MJ.
always the archive, so
yes,
the people that
absolutely.
can listen to it tomorrow or and thereafter, and the information will still be pertinent and current. So
yes, it will, and we'll get it up on YouTube, etc. So the replay of this broadcast will be available in several different ways. Well, I want to thank you so very much for taking the time out of your evening to spend a little time with me and talking about Dolores and QHHT, probably my favorite subject in the world. It's been really very enjoyable. I so enjoy you as a colleague and as a friend, and the really wonderful work you're doing with the indexing. You know, you really are our QHHT scholar, you know.
Well, it's been a work of love, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And I love working with Dolores's energy in her books, because there are energy that flows when you come in contact with her work. And I know you mentioned that you would like to do a radio program sometime in the future on some of her books, and that would be fun, because there is mega information that she writes about, and we can give the backstories of those books as well. So I'll let listeners know that there will be something in the future for that. But maybe tell us what's coming up with some of your guests that you'll be having.
Oh, sure. Well, you know, this program is to talk about QHHT and quantum healing, primarily the practitioners who are carrying on with Dolores's work. But I love the idea that we can bring clients on. You know, last week we had the wonderful Mary Truitt, and her client Miguel showed up, and we're going to have more of that for sure. But I really want to, in the future, talk to some people who are studying, you know, really studying the brain, et cetera, and how is this actually working? You know, let's talk about the rewiring of the brain and the neural pathways, et cetera, and those kinds of things are in the future. But it's the stories right now that I want to focus on, and there's so many great practitioners with so many great stories. And I do want to tell you that coming up next week, we're going to have the amazing Barbara Becker and Holly Duckworth, both practitioners of Dolores's method, and they have had some amazing adventures, swapping sessions with each other, and they're going to come on the show next week to talk about some of that. So I really look forward to speaking with Barbara and Holly next weekend.
Great. I'm going to listen in. It's been fun being your guest, and appreciate our interaction, and I wish the best to all the listeners. So I'm going to turn it over to you and say good night, Candace. Thank you.
Good night, MJ. Thank you so much for being here. And I want to thank all of you in the chat room and those of you who've called into the show. Thank you for taking time out of your evening to be with us today. And for those of you in the future, I hope that we've kind of covered some of the basics of QHHT in case you are thinking about having a session yourself. Hopefully we've answered some of your questions or addressed some of your concerns. Please know that you can always contact any QHHT practitioner with these questions, or you can just send me an email at newearthjourney@gmail.com. I'd be more than pleased to help you, whether you're near Kansas or across the world. I'd be happy to assist in helping you find a practitioner near you. And so I want to thank N5D once again for allowing me the opportunity to carry on the work of the late, great Dolores Cannon with this show, Quantum Healing with Candace. And again, thank you all for being with both of us and all of us and Dolores this evening. Good night, everyone.